Hi, my name is Sharif Youssef. I'm one of the co-founders of the Coptic Education Foundation, also known as CEF. We have recorded a series of podcasts on a very important topic, which is cultural diversity, adaptation, and assimilation. The topic of our podcast today is cultural diversity. What does that mean? Well, I have a couple of guests with me here that will address this particular topic. Sandy Gabriel and Catherine Hanna. Hello and welcome. Let me share with you my understanding. Well, first of all, I'm assuming everyone listening to these podcasts are Egyptian. So us Egyptians came from one culture, Egyptian culture. True, we may be different religions, but Egyptian culture is one culture. So there wasn't too much diversity from where we came from. But we come here and we find too many diversities. We find diversities in language, diversities in ethnicities, diversities in race, diversities in customs, and many other diversities. I would like to introduce one of our guests today, Sandy Gabriel. Sandy is the CEF Assistant Director and Counselor. She's also working at Pepperdine University as a Senior Academic Advisor and a part-time faculty for their graduate psychology program. She has a master's degree from USC in education counseling and has a bachelor's degree in psychology and human services from Cal State Fullerton. Sandy was born in Egypt and immigrated in the United States at a very young age with her parents. Welcome, Sandy.
Thank you.
I would like to introduce one of our guests today, Catherine Hanna. She is the CEF educational counselor. She currently also works as a senior academic advisor at USC. She has a bachelor's degree from University of California, Irvine, with a double majors in psychology and social behavior. She earned her master's degree in higher education and organizational changes from UCLA. Her family immigrated to the US, and she was born here. Welcome,
Thank you.
Catherine. So before I go too far, let me ask Catherine to share with us her view of what cultural diversity is about.
Yes, so to put it simply, cultural diversity is the variety of different cultural groups within one society. So just like you mentioned, Sharif, even within Egypt, there is some cultural diversity. We have people with different religious backgrounds. Some may be coming from different nationalities, born in different countries and then living in Egypt. And it can vary across even anything from gender, age, socioeconomic status. So some of us come from more wealthier families or more lower income families, and that in and of itself is cultural diversity. And that is within one country, such as Egypt. Now imagine moving to America. There's so much cultural diversity. There's diversity again within religion, ethnicity, nationality, the languages we speak. As they say, America is a melting pot, right? With various cultures, very different people from various backgrounds, bringing all that diversity, different perspectives, which is very important to understand. And as we think of different perspectives and as we live in a place that is a melting pot mixed with different religions and backgrounds and ideas and perspectives, the key thing, bringing it back to how do we adapt to this, right? How do we respond to the change in new environment? Do we hold on to what we know, or do we hold on to what we know but also be open to learning what else there is now that we are in a new environment? And again, as I mentioned before, this kind of looks at anywhere from like a social, psychological, and even physical change sometimes. Even the way we physically look, we look a little different, right? I know sometimes we see people, when they first come from Egypt, in a few years, they start dressing different, start acting a little different. So it's that adaptation to the new culture. So kind of that balance between the two cultures while trying to adapt to the dominant culture. And I want to stress the dominant culture because as coming from Egypt to America, you are no longer dominant, right? I know in Egypt we're not dominant considering the fact that we are Christian, Coptic, but in America we're even a smaller portion, a smaller number, I would say. So adapting to that dominant culture is key.
And actually, in addition to what you said, we live in California, all three of us. So actually, California is a melting pot of numerous cultures. So unlike going to live in another state, a small state where it's just pure white, one religion, one culture, there's not too many diversities. But here in California, the diversities between all the various languages and customs and it's one of the highest in the country. What do you think?
I totally agree. I think just to add on to what Catherine was saying, even if let's say we have two Egyptian families, right? Both Egyptian families are going to be different. So they both have different traditions, different culture within the family. I have my grandma. She would, when she's cooking, when she cook a fish, she would cut the tail and the head. And I asked her why. For the longest time, her mom would do it, and her mom would do it, and her mom would do it. That's a culture within my family. Another family might have a different culture of how they cook their fish. So it's still the Egyptian background, but how we do things is going to determine a culture.
I want to go back to your grandmother's example because I understand cutting the head and the tail dry up the fish a little bit.
Well,
so I may want to check with her again if this is something really a family tradition or she learned this and she didn't adjust, obviously. She continued to use this
Yes.
recipe. Okay, that's a good thing. Catherine, would you like to add?
Yeah, so I think just looking really from the way we do things differently, I think the one commonality that everyone should have as they migrate over here is, being willing, being open-minded, being willing to listen, not to judge, to recognize that, again, you are no longer dominant, right? So how do you adapt to survive, right? That's really what it comes down to. And I think the key thing is recognizing that there's a large amount of culture that exists in your new space, right? Not everyone speaks Arabic, right? There's so many different languages being spoken, so many ways of doing things. So being willing to adapt to that. And I know we must also be willing, key, to respect other differences. Because we have our certain way of thinking about things and acknowledging that, but we need to acknowledge that there's no one culture better than another. We're all people at the end of the day.
I remember when I first came, and I came I was 21 when I first came in the 70s. There was hardly any church. There was actually one church.
Wow.
There's hardly any places to buy Middle Eastern food. There's hardly any TV program in Arabic. None of that. I mean, we hardly had phone to call Egypt back then in the early 70s. So we had to find a way to live with the diversity that we were facing because there was no social network, Arabic or Egyptian or Christian social network. It was very limited. So I believe those that came in the early years, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, they were able to assimilate a lot quicker than those that came later. And I see this with many Egyptian families because they do have a lot to rely on. Their rate of assimilation is much slower because they really don't have to, because they can speak Arabic to almost everyone. They have Arabic TVs. They have the church all in Arabic or some in English. So they really not required or not forced to do like those that came earlier.
Yeah, I would say also technology has added to that, right? We could just watch, like you said, TV,
Definitely.
YouTube videos. We have access to that in our dominant language. We don't have to adapt. But I will say that tends to put a strain oftentimes in families within the parents and children. It's a huge strain, especially as the children is adapting to the culture, the American culture. That continues to put that big strain between students or children and their families and their parents to adapt.
Do you see distinctions between the other types of cultures, diversities, like we have Mexican, American,
Asian American.
Asian American? There are many other culture, African American, within that we interact with. Care to comment about how do you manage these various diversities and not only in culture, but also in religion and language and all of the other stuff that comes with it?
Yeah, I do think one commonality with any culture that's adapting is we tend to stick with what we know. And that is the biggest challenge for every culture. If you want to be successful in adapting, we need to be open-minded. We need to be able to listen. We need to judge. We need to interact with people that are different than us. If we fail to interact with people that are different than us, we're never going to change. We're never going to grow. We're never going to learn. We're never going to be able to fully adapt. So I do think it's important to maintain, that connection within your community, but also be willing to accept different ideas or perspectives, because the reality is oftentimes you're going to be working with people who are different than you, right? That's especially something I definitely saw with my dad as he began to work with more Americans or people that are different than him. He started to become a little more open-minded. His perspective started to change a little because he was learning from them. It was something different. And I do think that's something that we parents or families in general just need to keep in mind as they're adapting to the new culture.
I personally believe each culture brings some value that we can learn from and we can benefit from. We can do the same thing. It's a two-way street. We can bring our values to American values, and we can take and benefit from all the other cultures, and that benefit us. There's a lot of value in these other cultures. And the more open-minded you are to learn and to adapt from it, I think the quicker you'll be able to live comfortably and feel comfortable in dealing with other diverse groups. Well, this is the end of this podcast. We will continue our series in next podcasts, different topics. So appreciate you watching it and hope you continue to watch our other podcasts. Thank you.